Lot of energy is consumed. Lot of energy is consumed. Then leads to wastage of water as well. Of water as well, significantly. Leads to depletion of groundwater level. Leads to significant amount of depletion of groundwater as well. So these are the advantages and disadvantages that you can count out in the case of tube wells. Now here also very costly in plateaus or in areas of hard rocks. Okay. Then we come across to canal irrigation. Now canals, they used to be the most important source of irrigation up till the 1960s, and from 70s onwards, that is when wells and tube wells, they started coming into prominence. Now when you talk about or when you hear about the term canal irrigation, what is a canal? Canal is a separate artificial channel which is dug out in order to carry water from the nearby river areas into the connected farmlands. That is what a canal is. So, artificial channel which is dug to carry rivers or streams to the farmlands. Now this is something where the construction is a very costly process. Construction is costly and time consuming as well. For example, in the region of Uttar Pradesh, you had a canal which was initiated in the later part of 70s. That is when the plan was conceptualized, the Saryu Irrigation Water Project. But then, now that canal was supposed to carry water from river Saryu and to be utilized for irrigation purposes and in certain cases even for drinking water purposes. But then the completion of that project, which was launched in late 70s, that was completed a couple of years back and it became fully operational only last year. So you can imagine that the construction, now in this case the construction took 40 years, right? Much more than what it took Shah Jahan to construct the entire Taj Mahal. So in the modern post-independent India, we have consumed more time to construct canals than imagine what 400 years back, what time even Shah Jahan consumed to construct Taj Mahal. So you can imagine the state of affairs in which how we carry out constructional processes. Another problem which confronts us when it comes to the canal irrigation is oftentimes the level of water which is present, that is very low. The water which is present, as long as it is flowing, evaporation won't be much. But as the flow reduces in the canal, and that can happen during the dry seasons, the river water in itself comes down, so the canal supply reduces. Now in that situation, when the flow in the canal reduces, a lot of water is lost as a result of evaporation. oftentimes even in these canals you face issue of lot of sedimentation, due to which there is a lot of soil which is carried and little amount of water which is carried over these canals. So water deficiency is a common problem which is faced in these canals. That is why nowadays you will observe that the government is no longer initiating the construction of large canals. In fact, the full focus of the government is to be able to complete those canal projects which were launched 10 years, 20 years back, 30 years back in certain cases, and they have not yet reached the culmination point. Okay, now you will find that the government, rather than focusing on canal irrigation, is focusing upon areas such as micro irrigation. Now, in many regions, however, these canals, they have basically proven to be life-saving. For example, if you take a look at the western part of Rajasthan, in this area, this is where you have the Indira Gandhi Canal, the very prolific, the very famous Indira Gandhi Canal, which carries water from the region of Harike Barrage and from the river Satluj all the way into the western part of Rajasthan. The idea was to make that region green again. While due to the advent of Indira Gandhi Canal, much of that area has been brought under cultivation, but still their water availability is an issue. Another major canal which is very life-saving in sorts, that is what you observe in the region of Gujarat. Now, Gujarat is a very dry state in terms of water availability, not in other factors. It is a dry state. Now, dry state means availability of water is very, very less. Rainfall in itself is very less. So most of the parts of Gujarat, they suffer from frequent and subsequent crop failures. That is why after a lot of issues, after a lot of various different processes, the Sardar Sarovar Dam, which was built over the river Narmada, that provided huge amount of relief to many people in the portion of Saurashtra, in the portion of Kutch, Kathiawar region of Gujarat. And now that region is being supplied reliably. The availability of water is present in a reliable manner through the construction of canals which divert water from that dam into these canal systems. Now, in order to counter this loss of water due to evaporation, what has been done, because Gujarat already suffers from water scarcity, and there it cannot tolerate, it cannot withstand further loss of water. So that is why what is done is piped water, or these supply of water is done through large pipes, so that the purpose is solved without losing any amount of water. In the existing canals infrastructure which is prevalent, what the Gujarat administration has very efficiently done is they have covered the top of these canals in many of the places with solar panels. Now that is an area which receives high amount of solar insolation, and if you cover the top of the canals with the solar panels, the availability of electricity generation will also be humongous. So you are able to generate huge quantities of electricity. At the same time, you are able to prevent the loss of water due to evaporation. Okay. Now, after this, the main canal irrigated areas in the northern plains of India, where you have Uttar Pradesh, Punjab, Haryana, Rajasthan, Bihar, these account for 60% of canal irrigated area of the country. Immediately after independence, the canal construction was mostly focused in the region around the national capital. These are the areas. These are the regions which benefited immediately after independence in terms of canal construction. That is why when the requirement of green revolution came in, these were the areas which for the first time there the aspect of green revolution was tried out. Now, then after that we come to tank irrigation. Now what do we mean by tank irrigation? What is a tank? Tank is a storage structure. So it is a kind of an artificial storage structure that you build with the help of, let's say, blockading of rocks and on a hard base of sorts, whereby you store the excess water received during maybe a rainfall due to maybe when the river water is at its surplus. So you store that excess water and you utilize that excess water during the drier conditions. That is what a tank is. Okay, so that is where you have the tank irrigation. Now, even this tank and tankages, they cannot be built on any and every kind of a surface. For example, if you try to build a tank in the region where, let's suppose, you have a condition of soft sedimentary or soft alluvial soil, and if you enclose that structure and you store water, all that soil, all that water will seep down. That is where, even if you construct tankages in the northern part of the country, you have to cover it with cement so that it is able to hold water. You have to place certain impermeable materials so that water is stored. Whereas in the peninsular part of the country, typically the states such as Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, parts of Karnataka, etc., where you have hard rocky bases, there the construction of tankages is very easy. All that you have to do is you have to find a kind of a low-lying area and put certain rocks around, and water will be accumulated in that area. So that is where you will find a lot of tank construction to be naturally prevalent, naturally present in the portion of southern India, and that too the peninsular part of India. So tank irrigation is popular in Peninsular Plateau, where Andhra Pradesh, Telangana and Tamil Nadu, they are leading. Andhra Pradesh is the largest state of tank irrigation, and it has got a total of 29% of the tank irrigated area in the country. It is in this regard where states such as Telangana, they have embarked upon a very ambitious scheme of sorts, whereby they launched a mission, that is Mission Kakatiya. Now, under that mission, under that government scheme, what the aim was that, look, first of all, when you construct more tanks, you are able to return water into the ground level. Underground level, some water will percolate down, so that will improve the groundwater availability. Secondly, the more tanks you construct, better irrigational facility, and you have water stored in that tank. So that is where the government is now and has been now encouraging the farmers for some time that why not you carry out the rearing of fishes? Why don't you grow and culture fishes within those tanks, so that the farmers, they get an additional source of income as well. So tanks, they can also be utilized, for pisciculture. Pisciculture, which can augment the farm income. Okay, they can augment the farm income levels significantly. That is what you have in the case of tank irrigation. These are the various areas where you find tank irrigation. You will find a lot of them being predominant in the southern part of the country, particularly Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, in those areas. Now, then we come to the portion of agricultural productivity and efficiency in the case of agriculture. Now, when we talk about agricultural production, you grow crops in various areas. Depending upon the size of the land, depending upon various factors, you get the product, you get the output. But how efficient you are in terms of production, that is something which basically ends up creating a difference in the total productivity of the various different regions. For example, in the same parcel of land, if you are able to produce certain crops, that is what represents your productivity. That what is the amount of production that you can carry out in your parcel of land. So this is measured in terms of crop yield. And this is measured in the form of yield per hectare. That is, per hectare of land, what is the total productivity which is generated? what is the efficiency of utilization of your farmland. So this gives you an idea about the overall health of the agricultural system, whether it is sustainable or not. For example, the fertile regions of India that we refer to, that is the region of Punjab, Haryana, Western UP, which we also refer to as the grain baskets of India. These are the areas where the yield per hectare is almost half as compared to many of the European nations. That means from the same area of farmland, many of the European regions, they are able to produce twice as much as compared to the regions of Punjab and Haryana. That is because of declining soil fertility, agricultural practices, and so on. Even the productivity in terms of yield per hectare in the region of Punjab, Haryana, and Western UP, that has reduced when compared to our contemporary regions in the neighborhood of China as well. Now, one of the measures or one of the methods by which you end up measuring the efficiency is how many times a particular farmland has been put to use in one calendar year. That gives you an idea about how efficiently the land is utilized. And the parameter which is used to measure that is what is cropping intensity. So when you hear the term cropping intensity, it is basically a reflection of the number of times a farmland has been put to use in the same calendar year. So the number of times a piece of land is cultivated in a given year across cropping seasons, because we do know that in certain cases of farming practices, that we observe, we do know that a farmland might be utilized only once and after that left fallow and barren for rest of the year. As the crop is harvested, you don't grow any crop. But in many of the cases, in many of the farmlands, after you harvest one crop, then you plant another crop. After you harvest that crop, then you plant the third crop, and this process continues, this process goes on. So that is where a farmland can be utilized multiple times within one calendar year. And that is reflected by cropping intensity. So cropping intensity is calculated in terms of value, in terms of percentage, that you will see as gross cropped area by net sown area. So what is gross cropped area? What is the net sown area? Gross cropped area is the total area cultivated. Total area which has been cultivated. Net sown area will be area of the farmland. Area of farmland. So for example, in a farmland, let's say having an area of 5 hectare, let's say an area of 5 hectare. Now, this is a kind of a farmland. Let's suppose I have grown rice during the Kharif season. I have grown rice in 5 hectares. Then in the Rabi season, I have grown wheat. Again, let's say in 2.5 hectares out of this. Rest of the 2.5 hectares, I've utilized it for something else. So the total gross cropped area, will be how much? It will be 7.5 hectares. What is the area of farmland in this case? Area of farmland, or the net sown area, is 5 hectares. So what will be the cropping intensity? Let me see how good you guys are in terms of calculation. You have to multiply by 100 as well, guys. Good, Dhaval, Swati, Sangam, good. So it is 7.5 by 5 into 100, right? So it will come out to be around 150. Okay, so cropping intensity in this is 150. So higher the cropping intensity, that means better utilization of the land area and greater will the overall production be in that region. Generally, you will find that areas where you have the fertile alluvial soil which is present, cropping intensity is always in the tune of between 150 and above, 175 and above. And in the hilly areas, in the drier regions, generally, the cropping intensity tends to be very low. So very high cropping intensity of around 175 plus in the region of Punjab, Haryana, parts of southern part of West Bengal, Tamil Nadu, in the region between 150 to 175, UP, Bihar, Assam, Kerala, all the places where you have fertile depository soil which are present. Moderate cropping intensity 125 to 150 in slightly plateau regions, for example, Karnataka, Maharashtra, Andhra Pradesh, Chhattisgarh. Then low cropping intensity of less than 125 in either the drier areas such as Gujarat, Rajasthan, or the hilly areas such as J&K, Northeast states, Odisha, Jharkhand, and Himachal Pradesh. So this is about the production. Higher the cropping intensity, means greater production. Higher production. Okay. Gokul, cropping intensity is basically how many times you bring an area under cultivation. So that is what is expressed by gross cropped area by net sown area. Gross cropped area is the total area cultivated. So if you grow rice in one Kharif season and then the Rabi season you grow wheat, the total area will be almost double. Whereas the net sown area is the area of the farmland. So you divide it and you get the cropping intensity. Bhardwaj, why tanks are high only in Andhra Pradesh? So it is not as if in other areas you don't find them in persistent amount, but in the region such as Telangana, the portions of Andhra Pradesh, there, the existence of the plateau and the lack of other sources of irrigation, that makes tankages a prerogative. And also you will find tankages to be very prominent where the population is not concentrated in certain areas. There you will find tanks to be more reliable and flexible methods of irrigation. It is also to be found in significant areas around Karnataka. But parts of northern Karnataka, they are so very dry that tankages, they are not very remunerative in the sense. So you will find them in large numbers in Karnataka as well. Dorasani, higher cropping intensity also leads to soil degradation. Depends upon what kind of crops that you grow. So let's say you have grown rice. Rather than wheat, you have grown pulses. After that, you have grown a vegetable, again a leguminous crop, plant or a crop. So you will have a high cropping intensity, but your soil quality will be better. Okay. Now, then we come to the portion of agro and social forestry. What is the meaning of it and why do we need this agro and social forestry? So while we were discussing about the forests earlier, we had basically come across the fact that across the globe there has been a concerted effort to increase the area under green cover, increase the area under forest and tree cover across the various parts of the globe. India is no outlier in that regard. India is also one of those countries which typically wants and has always wanted to increase the area under green cover, and plantation of forests and trees should be more. Now, here you have various different approaches to do that. One of the approach which was coined was the agroforestry, another was social forestry, and so on. Now, this social forestry, the meaning of social forestry is what? It is a kind of a forest land which is created within the society and has to be taken care of by the society and by the local community. So, the forest reserve or the forested area to be nurtured and taken care of by the society and observed around settlements. Now, while this would solve the problem of having a forest cover and adequate green and tree cover, there was another persistent problem. And that is a problem which persists even today. That is the problem of very low farm income. And very early on, it was understood that if you have to fight the low level of farm income, one of the solution is diversifying the farm income rather than the farmers being dependent only on the crop yield. So that exposes them to the vulnerability that the crop failure might happen, thereby destroying their entire produce. So in that case, what should the farmers do? So that is where, in order to augment the farm income, what was suggested was agroforestry, which is a kind of social forestry in itself. Now, what is this agroforestry? Agroforestry is, suppose you have a farmland. Suppose, let's say, you have a farmland. Now, at the bordering areas of the farmland, you start growing trees, forming a kind of a natural barrier to your farmland. In many of the cases, in the middle of the farm as well, in certain row patterns, that is also where you can grow trees. So, which kind of trees? Any random tree which is there? No. Oftentimes, you have timber-bearing trees which are grown in this area, so that when the trees mature, they can be harvested, the timber can be harvested, and that can be sold in the market at significant price which is available. So that is where you have the agroforestry portion of it coming in. Now, the other set of advantages that agroforestry tends to provide is very simple and very basic, is that these trees will also have their own products, the byproducts, which the consumer market needs. So that will provide with the farmer with the additional source of income. It can also end up providing employment in the rural areas, where particularly the women folk in the rural areas, they have started setting up self-help groups. They have started setting up various self-help groups. Now there, they undertake various activities such as extraction, harvesting and packaging and selling of for minor producers from the forest, etc. And they are able to earn a meaningful income, while at the same time nurturing the agroecology and the agricultural biodiversity in that area. These trees will also serve as multiple different sources in terms of agricultural income, in terms of biodiversity production, in terms of maintenance of soil fertility, in terms of availability of moisture, etc., etc., and will also end up increasing the forest cover. So this is what an agroforest does look like, where you have the crops which are planted and in between you have rows of trees which are prevalent. So what goals that it pays, or the objectives that it ends up meeting, achieving, is increasing forest area and restoring the ecological balance. Here, biodiversity has to be counted in, meeting basic rural needs, rural requirements in terms of availability of timber for furniture, availability of timber for even fuel, that can be made available. Then better returns in terms of the economic incentive that you have, because when you plant these trees, you don't spend very much, right? The cost of investment is very less in the case of the sapling. But then when you harvest that tree, when you harvest that timber, you sell it out, you have a much better return. It can also significantly work towards controlling the pollution problem that we have, and it will generate employment, generation of employment, especially in the rural area. Especially in rural areas. And that too, in the section, for example, the women folk who, in many of the villages, in many of the rural areas, the women folk, they hardly are able to find their own voice. So they get this kind of a boost in terms of meaningful income that they can earn, and that provides significant amount of decision making power in the hands of the women as well. So agroforestry can solve multiple purposes by this. Okay. Trees also have a negative impact on agricultural crops. Some of the trees on some of the crops they do have. That is why you cannot simply end up growing any kind of a tree. For example, in this place, if I start growing a mango tree, what will happen to the rest of the crops? Not only will they be destroyed, there will be no remnant of it, because the number of insects that the mango tree will attract, that will start feeding on the crops. So you have designated kind of, that is why you have only certain types of trees that you end up planting. Many times the falling leaves of tree proves damaging to the crops in certain cases. But in many cases, the fallen leaves, they will be regenerated into the soil in the form of organic matter. They will augment the organic matter. In those cases where the crops are damaged, the trees are never planted in the middle of the field. They are planted on the sides, on the vicinity. Okay? Rashi, you said that silk is the most dominant. I did not say silk is the most dominant variety. I simply said mulberry silk is the most dominant variety of silk produced. So the majority of the silk produced, almost around 80 to 90% of the silk produced, is of the type mulberry. That is what I wanted to convey. Okay? I hope that is clear now. Now, then we come to the portion of green revolution. Very, very relevant for your mains. And I generally don't write on the PPT interview or personality test, because I'm aware, I have been made aware repeatedly that many of the candidates, their prime goal right now is to clear the prelims examinations. So I should not be like enticing too much about interview in front of you guys. But then this is one of the areas from where questions are asked in the interview process as well. So amongst you, the serious candidates who actually look at life beyond clearing the examination as well. Many of us, when we prepare for civil services, the first image that we get is the prelims exam, and that is where the imagination ends. And that is where the mind also indirectly tells you, first try to clear this, then think about the later stage. But many of the candidates, they have that kind of a mature thinking that what after I clear the mains examination, what after I clear. So for those of you, this is one particular area very relevant for your interview as well. This year, again, in the interview which happened, that is the 2021 result, I know certain candidates who were grilled on the question of green revolution. Now, what did the candidates expect? Was that the candidates expected that UPSC panel will ask them controversial questions around farm bills and questions around whether the government was right or whether the farmer... That expectation that has been set up in our mind is largely an outcome of the debate channels which go on. They are no longer news channels, the debate channels which keep on operating. That is where this kind of an expectation sets up in the mind. But the interview panel also knows that what the candidate is expecting. They will never ask you the controversial topics. Mostly they will not ask you. They ask something related to it. So green revolution, its advantages, its disadvantages, that is something which is important to know. Advantages Drawbacks and learnings. Drawbacks and learnings. Okay, this is where you will find the questions to be asked from. In general studies as well, in optional portion as well, in mains, multiple times this question has been asked. Now let us understand the concept of green revolution, why it is referred to as green revolution, when did it come to India, or was it conceptualized in India itself? So basically, after the Second World War, a large section of the world that was facing a kind of a scarcity in terms of availability of food. Feeding the hungry mouths, that became the biggest challenge in front of the world. Now, United States, basically at that point of time, one of the countries which had a lot of financial wherewithal, a lot of agricultural production which was going on, United States under the Marshall Plan used to supply Europe with huge amount of food grains. We have already talked about previous week that India also, amongst countries such as Pakistan and so on, India also used to be very dependent on the availability and the supply of food grains from the region such as US. Now, various different countries in Africa, in South America, in Asia, and even in North America, countries like Mexico, they were facing that hunger crisis. They were facing the issue that you did not have enough food which was produced. Why? Because the productivity was less. The soil was not very fertile in certain cases. Available lack of water in many cases led to crop failure. So overall, the productivity was less. Now, under Professor William Gadd, that was for the first time when you had the coinage of this term green revolution. And this was done in order to basically support the idea of food sufficiency in these third world nations and the least developed nations of the world. This idea was further worked upon by Professor Norman Borlaug, who experimented it by growing a quality of wheat of rice, where he experienced that the production can almost double in a very short span of time if certain very basic parameters are taken care of. He carried out a detailed study of that experiment that he did. He found out with the wheat crop that if you, rather than growing the normal variety of seeds, why not we grow the high yielding variety of seeds? Why don't we provide consistent irrigation facilities to augment the shortage of moisture? Why don't we supplement the soil fertility by additional chemical nutrients? So by these methodologies, Norman Borlaug could increase the productivity of wheat. Now, our biggest, one of the most prolific and largest agricultural scientists, Dr. Swaminathan. Dr. Swaminathan borrowed that idea and wanted to implement that idea in India. He, in fact, invited Norman Borlaug to India to carry out a feasibility study and to basically advise that how to implement green revolution in India. Now, in India, the government process is very different from how the governments operate across the globe, right? You need a lot of various factors to be in your favor before you are able to convince the government that this is a right measure. So when Dr. M.S. Swaminathan, he went to the government officials to convince them that green revolution is the need of the hour in order to reach food self-sufficiency and production in India, the government officials did not buy his plan. They were hardly even impressed. And he was turned down. Now, he could not do anything. Without government's nod, you cannot do anything. So what did he do? And those were not the days of Instagram Live and other social media platforms that all the various different farmers who are interested, they should basically come at this particular city by this time and we will have a joint protest, etc. Those were not the times. So what did he do? He started inculcating and practicing these measures, the famous anecdotal story as it goes. So he started practicing those measures in his own backyard. And there he had certain astounding results. Then, when the production increased, that is when he called those government officials to show them firsthand. Dr. Norman Borlaug was also invited to convince the government officials. Reluctantly, Government of India agreed to implement these measures in India. Now, these measures would involve what? These measures would involve irrigation facilities. Now, irrigation facilities, few areas had canals. Many areas needed the existence of tube well structures. For tube well, you need what? Electricity in the rural areas. You need the supply of chemical inputs, etc., fertilizers, etc., high yielding variety of seeds. Now, not many parts of the country were suitable or developed enough to carry out this process. For example, when we talk about the eastern part of the country, at that point of time, I do not think they would have even dreamt of having electrification in the rural areas. Right? At that point of time, availability of water for irrigation was still a very far off dream. But immediately after independence, the government had started working in areas around Western UP, Haryana, and Punjab to dig out these canals to bring electricity to those areas. So those were the areas around national capital of Delhi which were chosen for this practice and for this experiment. The results were astounding. And suddenly the productivity of food that rocketed sky high. India, which was dependent on foreign grains, now had enough buffer reserve which could feed it for many years together. That is when we gained food security and food sufficiency. Since that point onwards, the regions around Punjab, Haryana, Western UP, they have been championing the production of food grains by the same methodology, and these are the areas which are referred to as the grain baskets of India. Now, while this was happening, eastern part of India was largely ignored, and other agricultural areas of the region, they were largely ignored to the extent of providing facility to the farmers in terms of infrastructure, road connectivity, etc. Those areas were largely ignored because once you have one flagship thing that you can showcase, you don't care for the rest of the things. That is where an agricultural disparity started setting in. You had a kind of an overwhelming productivity coming from these areas, and these areas prospered. The economic incentives increased, and the farmers, they started becoming rich. Whereas the farmers in many other parts of the country, they languished because the productivity was still less. Now, this brought about a kind of a social differentiation in terms of income levels. The condition became so dire that many regions from Odisha, Eastern UP, Bihar, West Bengal, Jharkhand, farmers, because of consistent crop failures, they would then leave their land, migrate to the region of Punjab, and work in those fields as landless migrant laborers. But slowly and steadily, the local state governments in many of the regions, particularly in the southern states, they got their act together. And they started building up programs around certain crops, certain agricultural mechanisms, certain market mechanisms, and that is when the productivity increased in various parts of the country. Now, fast forward this to 30 years to, let's say, around the decade of 2000 and 2010 onwards. Now, at that point of time, by the time of 1980s, around 1982-83, the maximum efficiency in terms of productivity in the area of Punjab, Haryana, and Western UP, that was reached. And the farmers, they at that point of time were supplying insecticides, fertilizers, nutrients, irrigation, everything they were giving, and they would grow rice and wheat. The land was so very fertile, production used to be in huge quantums. They would grow sugarcane as well. Now, minimum support price was something which was declared in the late 60s itself. Now, both rice and wheat would give you that minimum support price from the government, assured buying. Now, the farmers in that region of Punjab, Haryana, Western UP, they stuck to the same methodology. That if this methodology has worked for the previous few seasons, that will work in the future as well. With the passage of time, what happened? The soil started losing its fertility. Due to over irrigation, the soil started turning saline. Because you were growing crops in that area, which the area naturally is not made for, which the area naturally is not suitable for. You were growing those crops such as rice, right? So naturally, the groundwater level started plummeting. The productivity started falling. And in those areas, out of all of them, in these areas, the grain baskets, the farm income started plummeting. The farm income started going down. That is when outward migration in huge quantum that was observed. The ironic fact is that, and this I probably have told you before as well, the ironic fact is that as a documentary showed by the German TV, that is the Deutsche Vision, there basically there was a detailed research and the documentary which was made on this, that while in the region of Punjab you have many migrant laborers coming from the region of UP, Bihar and Bengal to work in the fields, the people from Punjab, they themselves are migrating to European nations in order to work in fields in Italy, France, and so on. So the agricultural income has been going down. Now that has provided certain learnings for us from this green revolution. So let us study this. Let us try to understand what this is and what the drawbacks of this are. Okay? So green revolution basically refers to the multiple growth in crop production in the third world countries, the less developed nations, that is, based on the use of modern inputs, technology, high yielding variety of seeds. High yielding variety of seeds and mechanization as well as irrigation facilities. All of that, if put together, that will augment the productivity and the farm income. Now, green revolution was termed by Professor William Gadd in 1958 in a seminar in Washington over food crisis in the third world countries. This was then worked upon by Professor Norman Borlaug, who developed the high-yielding variety seeds by genetic modification and cross-fertilization of the good quality wheat. Now, it was successful in Mexico, and the wheat production doubled in a span of 7 years, and self-sufficiency was achieved. M.S. Swaminathan invited Norman Borlaug, who suggested similar revolution in Indian agriculture. So that is how you had the advent of green revolution in India. Now, green revolution and its success was based upon certain parameters, certain characteristics. So if you have to look at the basis for green revolution, first of all, high yielding variety of seeds that increased the yield per hectare, increased yield per hectare. Then commercialization of agriculture happened after green revolution came in, at least in India. Because before that, the farmers across the country, they would produce, but they would produce for self-consumption. It was only after the advent of green revolution whereby the farmers, they started producing for market purposes, and that is where they started growing crops which would give them maximum amount of income. Use of chemical fertilizers to augment the depleting fertility of soil, right? To augment depleting fertility of soil. Okay, irrigation facilities, mechanization, rural electrification, consolidation of land holdings. That was the land reform, which was a major step which was required after independence, whereby certain people, they had very large land areas where many people were landless. So land reform activities were carried out, credit and microfinancing to provide easy loans in order to buy better variety of seeds, in order to install tube wells, in order to buy tractors. Loans were available, made available at cheap rates, so that eventually when the farm income would improve and when they would have various setups, overall they would turn profitable, which actually happened. So use of pesticides, insecticides and weedicides as well to deal with the unwanted growth and the unwanted intrusion into the farmland by the biological community. So all these made Green Revolution a success, whereby the productivity was augmented. But as I told you, this also brought about some learnings and certain drawbacks. So what were the limitations when it comes to Green Revolution? The limitations were significant. First was ignorance of indigenous varieties of seeds. Variety of seeds. Right? Because now you have started using high yielding variety of seeds so prominently, the indigenous, the local varieties of seeds, they are getting ignored. So here, the immediate follow-up question can be, then what is wrong in that? Why do we have to care for the indigenous variety if the other variety is giving me more money? Why do I care for that? That is because the indigenous varieties are the ones which are naturally to be found in a region. That means they are much more conducive with the soil type, with the climatic type. And these are the ones which are more resilient to slight change in the rainfall pattern and even withstanding the impact of climate change. Whereas a high-yielding variety of seeds, if they don't get the adequate conditions which they demand, and if the conditions of rainfall, etc., they change slightly, the high-yielding varieties can be liable and prone to failure. So, HYV seeds are prone to fail, to crop failure, more prone to crop failure due to variation in rainfall pattern, temperature, etc. Whereas the indigenous variety is more resilient. Okay, they are more resilient and much more strong enough to withstand these adversities of climate change. So in the present scenario, when the climate is changing, the indigenous varieties could help us significantly. Then, other than that, if you take a look at it, depletion of groundwater, leading to coming in, and that is very harmful for the human health. Then, after that, soil turns saline due to over irrigation, or rather than this, let us include this into one point: soil degradation. Soil degradation, why? Because of two reasons: over application of fertilizers application of fertilizers, and then the other one can be saline soil salinity increases due to over irrigation. Okay, salinity increases due to over irrigation in general. So that is leading to soil degradation in many areas. Overall, due to this, declining fertility has reduced the productivity. And when the productivity has been reduced, the farm income also reduces. Other than that, over-reliance on food crop production and a subsequent lack of crop diversification right? This has happened, has made the soil infertile and reduced our production variety. That is, due to the Green Revolution, you have a kind of a consistent production of wheat, rice. Now, both wheat and rice, they extract fertility and nutrient from the soil cover, rendering the soil infertile with each passing day. Whereas, if you would diversify the production in terms of vegetables, in terms of fruits, in terms of flowers, not only will they end up giving you more amount of remuneration, at the same time, that diversification will give more nutrition availability on to the population. It will make the prices of vegetable and the fruits much more cheaper, which is very much required and is the need of the hour as India fights malnourishment. At the same time, it will give the soil some amount of time to recharge its natural fertility. Then brought lopsided development in agriculture where only a small pocket flourished while the remaining areas languished. Right? Due to government apathy, which generally exists, you had a kind of a lopsided development in agriculture, and that brought about a social marginalization. That social marginalization is never good in terms of the overall developmental impact. If you take a look at the future path and the future generation and the growth of the country, a country can never grow if only one part of it is growing and the other portion of it is not. In agriculture, if only Punjab and Haryana are growing, the rest are not, that does not bode well for agriculture, because eventually those areas will plateau as they have, and those areas productivity will reduce. Then if the rest of the country, their sufficient work has not been done in agriculture, then the agricultural setup, the system in itself, can collapse on its knees. That is why, under the prime ministership of Dr. Manmohan Singh, the government of India basically decided to bring forward these learnings, bring about these learnings and these limitations and drawbacks, and implement the Green Revolution in the hitherto ignored areas. So that program was named as BGREI, which has been pushed forward by the present government as well. That is BGREI. That is bringing Green Revolution to Eastern India. This is something which is happening, okay, which has to happen. We don't know that unless and until we all know that unless and until irrigational facilities are provided, reliable infrastructure, farm to factories, connectivity, all of that is not worked upon, you cannot bring about a boom in agricultural productivity all of a sudden just because you have conceptualized a scheme. In many parts of Eastern India, eastern part of the country, land reform and land consolidation is still a major issue which is preventing a kind of an agricultural growth, because in many parts of the Eastern India, the size of the farm is so very small that you cannot expect a sustained agricultural production coming out of it. So overall, while Green Revolution has been huge, it has been remarkable, it has been a landmark achievement as far as India gaining food security and food sufficiency is concerned. And this is what changed our very status from a kind of a consumer state to a kind of a supplier state. Look at all the various different types of crops. Now we have got that template and we are using it for various different types of crops. So overall, if you take a look at it, then basically we are either the largest or amongst the largest producers of various different agricultural products across the globe. So overall, this has helped. But then at the same time, it has unraveled various different lacunae which needs to be worked upon. Okay? Then we have the livestock resource. India has amongst the largest livestock resource available across the globe. Now, this survey which is carried out, the census survey for the livestock which is carried out, you are not expected to learn the absolute numbers. All that is expected out of you nowadays in the type of a pattern of questions that are asked is basically you should be aware about the fact that India has got large sections of livestock population. Now that can be utilized in a conducive manner, because the livestock, when you take care of the animals, when you go for animal husbandry, you are ensuring a kind of a income diversification of the farmers. What they will do is they provide income diversification for farmers. So in a way, it has got the potential to increase farm income. By what methodology? By the process of mixed farming. Mixed farming. What is mixed farming? In this, you go for crop cultivation plus animal husbandry. So even if your crops fail in a certain year due to lack of rainfall or overindulgence of rainfall, your animal husbandry income will be sufficient to